It was an ordinary summer day, no different from any other. The entire court of the kingdom buzzed with celebration for the birthday of their king, Hyojo. Music drifted through the warm air, banners fluttered in the breeze, and laughter echoed from every corner as nobles and servants alike raised their voices in toast to the ruler. Yet in the midst of the revelry, a lone girl emerged from the crowd. Yeonwoo moved with a sword clutched tightly in her hand, the blade biting so deeply into her palm that fresh blood welled up and trickled down her wrist. Whispers rippled through the celebrants as heads turned, eyes widening at the sight of the disheveled figure pressing forward. Servants hurried toward her, calling out offers to tend to the wound, but she ignored them completely. Her steps never faltered. Hatred and rage burned in her chest like a living flame, driving her onward with single-minded purpose. She reached the grand doors of the inner courtyard and shoved them open with a sharp, decisive motion. There sat King Hyojo upon his throne, his expression one of profound boredom as he surveyed the festivities. The moment his gaze landed on her, however, a broad smile spread across his face. At last his darling Yeonwoo had come to celebrate her husband's birthday. She stood opposite him, her face a mask of icy emotionlessness. The hatred she felt was so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. She could not forget, could not forgive. He gestured lazily toward the sword and told her to set aside the dangerous thing. Her voice came out cold and flat as she refused, stating that she had only one purpose left. Amused, he asked if she meant to try killing him again. He sighed with mock disappointment, reminding her that she had already failed once before. Laughter erupted from those gathered around the throne. Yeonwoo's eyes swept over them, but she kept her hatred hidden behind a wall of determination. Blood continued to drip from her clenched fist onto the polished floor. Without a trace of fear in her posture, she declared that he should have ended her life back then, instead of slaughtering her entire family and leaving her to suffer. Hyojo rose from the throne, annoyance flickering across his features. How could he possibly kill the one he loved? His tone was chilling. She stared at him with pure loathing and demanded whether he even understood the meaning of the word love. Her voice rose into a shout as she called him insane, unable to comprehend how he could speak of love after everything he had done. The pain he had inflicted on her family, on her, poured out in desperate cries. She accused him of murdering them all simply because they had looked at her, of hanging their severed heads upon the courtyard gate for all to see. How dare he speak of love after branding her body with his name using a hot iron? The sky above was bright and clear, yet inside her soul there was only darkness. No one understood her suffering. Hyojo watched her carefully, savoring every moment of her anguish. Calmly, he insisted that every act had been an expression of his love for her. Emptiness flooded Yeonwoo, then she wept, realizing he would never comprehend her pain. He stepped closer, his voice confident and commanding, declaring once more that she belonged to him alone. She pressed her hands over her ears and screamed that she was not his and never would be. He seized her bloodied hand, the one still gripping the sword, intending to pry the weapon away before she could harm herself further. Leaning down, he pressed a kiss to her knuckles and repeated that she was his forever. A violent shiver ran through her. In a fit of hysterical laughter, still clutching the sword, she called him a madman and said she no longer knew what to do with him in this life or the one before it. Surprise flashed across his face at the mention of a previous life. He clearly did not understand. Seizing the momentary distraction, Yeonwoo lifted the blade to her own throat. A strange peace settled over her. One swift motion and it would all end. She told him she would never belong to him. With a satisfied smile, she drew the sword across her neck in a clean, decisive cut. Blood poured freely. As Hyojo's wild shout of her name echoed in her ears, she felt her soul beginning to slip away. In that final instant, she thought of this as her birthday gift to him, eternal torment for the monster who had claimed to love her. She wished him nothing but endless suffering. Darkness closed in. A doctor was called for in frantic shouts, but it was too late. Yeonwoo stared into the void, a faint smile on her lips, believing she had finally escaped her tormentor forever. Then, unexpectedly, a face appeared before her fading vision. A man was crying, his expression filled with profound grief. She wondered dimly why he looked at her with such sorrow, but the thought dissolved as her eyes closed. When she opened them again, she was alive. Consciousness returned in a rush of confusion and terror. She was no longer in the throne room. Tall trees surrounded her on every side, their leaves rustling softly in a gentle wind. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had returned once more. Everything was beginning again. Panic surged through her veins. She screamed that she did not want this, that she could not endure another cycle. Tears streamed down her face as hysteria took hold. She collapsed to the ground, repeating the same broken question over and over. Why? Why was this happening to her again? Exhaustion weighed on her limbs, yet her mind raced in chaos. She heard the distant sound of hooves and froze. Fear gripped her. Could Hyojo have already found her? A horse stopped nearby. A man's voice spoke, not Hyojo's. Slowly, Yeonwoo turned her head. The face that met her eyes was strangely familiar, though she could not place where she had seen it before. The man regarded her with surprise and recognition, addressing her as though he knew her from the world of the living. In that moment, another voice reached her, warm, worried, and achingly familiar. Her family was there. Her father and younger sister stood nearby, glancing at each other with concern after what appeared to be a sudden accident. Her father checked on her mother, relief evident on his face. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Yeonwoo felt a spark of genuine warmth and strength. They were alive. The stranger explained that there must have been some kind of mishap and asked if anyone was hurt. Her father answered that they were all right. The man offered assistance, though he seemed uncertain about their modern requests. When her father asked to borrow a phone to call for help, the stranger turned and quietly gave an order to his own attendants. They would be taken to Jang Gong's residence. Unease coiled tightly in Yeonwoo's stomach. Jang Gong was the ruler of the underworld, and Hyojo's father. If they went there, she knew she could not avoid another encounter with the monster who had destroyed everything. She had to find a way to escape, to protect her family this time. Black crows circled overhead, and a chill ran down her spine. Danger hung thick in the air. Her sister called out to her, saying the man had agreed to help. Yeonwoo stood frozen, unable to speak. Something strange was happening to her hair. It had turned light and impossibly shiny, gleaming under the dappled sunlight. The others stared in astonishment. The stranger remarked that it was beautiful, the first time he had ever seen hair shine so brilliantly. He told her firmly to come with him. It was not a request. When her father protested angrily, demanding why only she was being taken, the man replied that they need not worry. She would return to them after greeting Jang Gong. Yeonwoo's mind spun with guilt and regret. Voices echoed inside her head, accusing her that this was all her fault, that her family suffered because of her. She whispered the same words to herself, again and again, apologizing for the pain she had brought upon them in every previous life. The stranger waited, his presence steady and decisive. Around them, the summer air carried the faint scent of pine and distant rain, but Yeonwoo felt only the heavy weight of dread and the fragile thread of hope that perhaps this time things could be different. The voices returned again, cruel and unrelenting, swirling inside Yeonwoo's mind like a relentless storm. They accused her sharply, declaring that everything was her fault. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered apologies over and over, repeating that it was all her mistake. The voices pressed deeper, questioning whether she truly regretted the suffering she had brought upon her family in their previous lives. She desperately tried to block them out, not wanting to hear the painful reminders, not wanting the nightmare to repeat itself. They asked if she had known from the start that Hyojo would kill them all. Guilt clawed at her chest. She had tried so many times to fix everything, to change their tragic fate, yet she had failed in every single attempt. The voices continued their merciless taunt, warning her that this time it could happen again. Her loved ones would die once more because of her. Then, as abruptly as they had come, the voices fell silent. With all her doubts pushed aside, Yeonwoo made her decision. she would go with him. It was the only way to save the lives of those she cherished. She would try again, no matter how heavy the burden. In a soft, meek voice, she told the stranger she would accompany him, forcing herself to remain calm so her family would not fall into panic. The man's eyes flashed with clear interest. He said nothing, merely giving a slow, approving nod. Her sister immediately pressed for confirmation, while their father warned that the choice could be extremely dangerous. Yeonwoo herself wondered in silence whether she had made the right decision. Yet she knew deep down it was the only path that could keep her away from Hyojo for now. Suddenly, their mother's sharp voice cut through the air, filled with irritation. She ordered her husband to leave the girl alone, speaking coldly and aloofly. She claimed that Yeonwoo had never listened to them anyway. Their mother went on, saying that no one truly understood how deeply their souls ached or how much they truly cared for her, and that the girl had always been selfish. Their father tried to reason with his wife, and Yeonwoo quietly insisted she was not like that. But her mother simply replied that they had to go. She no longer cared, so Yeonwoo could do whatever she wanted. When her father asked if she would truly abandon their daughter so easily, her mother offered no answer. A quiet sorrow filled Yeonwoo's heart. She wished she could explain everything to her mother, to make her understand the truth, but she knew she could not. Not yet. This time, she had to protect them all, even if it meant bearing the weight alone. Her attention returned to the mysterious stranger. He had watched the entire exchange in complete silence, offering no interference. Then he sat down opposite her, a faint smile of interest curving his lips. He told her she was a strange woman, and that her decision to stay with him was not an easy one. Yeonwoo already knew that, but hearing it from him still surprised her. Gathering her courage, she stretched out her hand toward him, silently signaling that she was ready for anything. She told him firmly that she needed to speak with him in private. While he continued to watch her with that intrigued smile, she asked if he could hold her hand. He smiled with clear satisfaction and gently took her hand. He said it was a great honor to hold the hand of such a beautiful lady. Then he lowered his head and softly kissed her fingers, closing his eyes in quiet pleasure. Without lifting his lips from her skin, he raised his gaze to meet hers. Yeonwoo looked at him in confusion, feeling a strange warmth she could not quite understand. He asked what she wanted to say. Determined to see this through, Yeonwoo steadied herself. She had fallen into the underworld after a car accident in her previous life, and every time she died, she returned to this same place. This would be her third life here. After 2 monotonous, painful existences, she would use every piece of knowledge she possessed. Her hand remained in his. She was unsure if she could trust him, yet she could feel the steady warmth of his palm. Summoning all her courage, she pulled him closer. He looked at her in surprise, waiting. Yeonwoo placed her free hand over her chest, looked him straight in the eyes, and told the stranger to take her. Her words left him momentarily stunned. He asked whether it was appropriate to say such things to a complete stranger, and if she was truly certain. Casting aside the last of her doubts, Yeonwoo answered confidently. After living through 2 lives in this underworld, she understood one thing clearly: she would never be able to escape Hyojo on her own. The mere thought of her terrible fate repeating terrified her. This was her best chance, perhaps her only chance, to save both herself and her family. She told him firmly that she would be his woman. The man was visibly surprised. For a moment he could not respond. He did not know her, so her sudden offer was unexpected. Deciding not to prolong her anxiety, he smiled gently. He could sense she needed something from him. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and told her she looked deeply upset, that her confession seemed born of desperation. He admitted he was genuinely interested in her, yet he wondered why she would offer herself with such a sad expression. Even his interest did not change his principles. He did not want someone who was not truly willing. Sensing her future hanging in the balance, Yeonwoo protested calmly. She assured him she meant her offer. She reminded him that he had wanted to help her family and introduce them to Janggong, as the rules of their world required. The man smirked inwardly, impressed by her cleverness, but chose to speak with her privately, breaking that very rule. When Yeonwoo asked if she had misunderstood, he simply smiled, acknowledging her intelligence. He said he suspected it would not be easy with her, but he was willing to take the risk. Suddenly he moved closer and asked for her forgiveness. Before she could fully understand, her feet left the ground. She let out a small scream of surprise as he lifted her onto his horse. He told her he was offering a mutually beneficial deal. He reminded her that he did not easily get close to strangers, and he had never expected her to offer herself so readily. He wanted to know her true intentions. Still studying her face, he asked her to be honest. Yeonwoo hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal. In the end, she told him part of the truth, that she was doing this only for her family. She had to protect them. Desperately, she clutched his shoulders and begged him to protect her no matter what happened. He agreed without hesitation, promising he would do everything in his power. In one graceful motion, he mounted the horse behind her, holding her securely with one arm. Though anxious about riding, Yeonwoo stayed silent as he spurred the horse forward, galloping toward his estate. After a while, he smiled and remarked that they had not even properly introduced themselves. He told her his name was Hwita and asked for hers. She replied softly that her name was Yeonwoo. She closed her eyes, feeling the wind against her face. Hwita watched her quietly, thinking how beautiful and intelligent she was. He felt an unexpected sympathy for her. Yeonwoo, for the first time in what felt like forever, enjoyed the gentle breeze and the sweet scent of flowers around them. She could barely remember the last time she had tasted such freedom. Hwita quietly told her that she had a very beautiful name. Lost in her thoughts, Yeonwoo did not notice how much time had passed until Hwita announced they had arrived. She opened her eyes and recognized the back gate of the castle. Fear crept into her chest with every step the horse took closer to the entrance, but she refused to let it show. Hwita told her he preferred to enter quietly through this door to avoid drawing attention. As she gazed at the glowing, blooming flowers, he asked if it was her first time seeing them. Yeonwoo knew these were the only flowers that bloomed in the underworld, drawing their light from the rivers of burning lava that flowed through this dark realm. The man explained that the flowers absorbed that faint light from the lava flows to survive in eternal darkness. She lowered her head as painful memories flooded back. Once long ago, Hyojo had brought her these same flowers with a joyful smile, saying they were as beautiful as she was. At the time, she had felt happy. Now the memory only brought anxiety and regret. Hwita said nothing, simply watching her in silence, patiently waiting to understand her emotions and true intentions. Yeonwoo finally accepted that this was not a dream. She had truly returned to this place again, feeling vulnerable and defenseless. Yet this time she vowed silently she would do everything right. No one would get hurt. As they passed through the open gate, her heart pounded fiercely. She struggled to calm her racing thoughts. She had returned to this horrible, shameful place once more, but this time she would change their fate. Suddenly a familiar female voice called out, addressing Hwita as master and saying they had been waiting for his return. Yeonwoo turned slightly and saw the girl she had known many times before. The young woman stepped forward and offered to serve her, introducing herself as Sarim. She looked exactly the same as in the previous lives, unchanged, loyal, and kind. Memories of Sarim's gentle care flooded Yeonwoo's mind. Even when she had been on the verge of death, this maid had stayed by her side, constantly worrying about her and asking if she needed anything. For the first time since her return, a small warmth bloomed in Yeonwoo's aching heart. Sarim's presence brought a quiet wave of love and warmth that Yeonwoo had not felt in what seemed like lifetimes. The maid always encouraged her lady to share every sorrow, promising she would listen and offer whatever help or support she could give. She vowed that no matter what happened, she would stand firmly by Yeonwoo's side. Those gentle words stirred fond memories from previous lives, memories that now wrapped around Yeonwoo's heart like a comforting embrace. In the quiet of her thoughts, Yeonwoo silently thanked whatever forces had allowed her to meet Sarim again. She had missed the maid deeply and had worried about her fate after everything that had unfolded before. Sarim turned to Hwita and reported that Yeonwoo's family had already been taken to a safe place. A heavy sigh of relief escaped Yeonwoo's lips at the news. The knowledge that her loved ones were protected, even for a moment, lifted some of the crushing weight from her chest. In her past lives, Sarim had been one of Hyojo's people. The memory hit so sharply that Yeonwoo forgot how to breathe. Terror gripped her for a fleeting second before she forced it down. Sarim stood before her now, smiling sweetly and waiting patiently for Hwita's next orders, looking exactly as loyal and unchanged as ever. Hwita turned to the maid and instructed her to take Yeonwoo away, dye her hair any color she wished so long as it no longer shone, then bathe her and dress her in clean clothes. Once everything was ready, he wanted her sent to his room. The words sent a jolt of worry through Yeonwoo. She hoped she had misheard and quietly asked him to confirm. Hwita simply smiled and told her they would spend the night together. The amusement in his eyes was unmistakable. Sarim motioned for Yeonwoo to follow her, offering to show her around the estate and help with anything she might need. The maid's smile was warm and pleasant as she waited. Yeonwoo felt a flicker of annoyance that Sarim did not remember her from before, yet she quickly reminded herself that perhaps it was better this way, no painful reminders of the past lives they had shared under darker circumstances. As they walked, Sarim explained that Yeonwoo would be staying in one of the rooms starting today, and that she should take time to look around and grow accustomed to her new surroundings. Yeonwoo thanked her, then hesitated, unsure how to begin. Sarim noticed and asked gently what was wrong, ready to assist with anything. Yeonwoo requested that the maid speak to her more freely, without formal titles, and clarified that their relationship with Lord Hwita was not what Sarim might have assumed. She hoped there would be no further misunderstandings. Sarim insisted firmly that she would continue addressing her properly, especially since this was the first time her master had ever brought a woman into his home. The revelation surprised Yeonwoo. Hwita was undeniably handsome. She could not understand why he had never done so before. She recalled the determined look in his eyes and the gentle touch of his hand when they first met. There was something quietly attractive about him, and the thought made her cheeks warm with unexpected embarrassment. She decided to push the feeling aside for later. Sarim seemed about to add something more, but changed the subject instead. After a long pause filled with hesitation, she finally spoke again, her voice quieter. She admitted that she had realized something important about Yeonwoo, that the young woman felt special to Hwita. The words caught Yeonwoo off guard and kindled a small spark of hope deep inside her. If it were true, it could change everything for her in this life. Still curious, Yeonwoo asked Sarim what kind of person Lord Hwita truly was. The maid hesitated for a moment, then lowered her head, drew in a steady breath, and began to explain. She asked first whether Yeonwoo had ever heard of guardian spirits. When Yeonwoo shook her head, pretending ignorance, Sarim continued. In the underworld, she said, every person was deeply connected to an animal spirit known as a guardian. Those with weaker spirits, such as sparrows or rabbits, tended to be less powerful. The truly strong ones, those who possessed tigers, usually became rulers of the realm. In moments of extreme need, these spirits could manifest fully, and the stronger the guardian, the stronger its owner. Yeonwoo kept her expression neutral, though the words sent a cold shiver through her body. She already knew all of this from her previous lives, yet hearing it again reminded her of the constant danger that surrounded her. Sarim went on, saying that the current king of the underworld, Janggong, possessed the strongest guardian spirit of all, a mighty tiger. Yeojo, she added, carried the spirit of a brown bear, which explained his cruel and cold-blooded nature. Yeonwoo's stomach tightened at the mention of her former husband. She refused to let the old fear take root again. She forced herself to listen as Sarim described Hwita's own guardian, a powerful black wolf, one of the strongest spirits in existence. Many people simply called him the Black Wolf because of it. The description fit him perfectly, Yeonwoo thought. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator, polite yet distant, careful yet commanding. A wolf suited him exactly. They reached the prepared room, where a steaming bath awaited. Yeonwoo sank gratefully into the warm water, letting the heat soothe her weary body after the long, exhausting day. Sarim asked what color she would like for her hair, noting that her snow-white skin would suit almost anything. She suggested dyeing it the same shade as Hwita's to make the change less noticeable. The idea pleased Yeonwoo, and she agreed with quiet excitement. As the maid worked, Yeonwoo noticed how much more confident and talkative Sarim seemed in this life. It was different from before, yet comforting. She remembered the maid's earlier promise, that no matter what happened she would always be on her side, and decided in that moment to trust Sarim once more, to try to rebuild the friendship they had shared in her previous existence. When the dye was rinsed away, Sarim cried out in dismay. The color had barely taken. Yeonwoo's hair remained almost unchanged, though its unnatural shine had dimmed slightly. The maid looked disappointed, wishing she could have matched it perfectly to Hwita's. Yeonwoo reassured her that the result was enough, and that she liked her hair just as it was. Sarim left her to rest for a while, and Yeonwoo finally allowed herself a long, slow exhale. Alone in the bath, she let the warm water ease the aches that had settled into her muscles after days of hardship and tension. Droplets slid down her skin, a quiet reminder that she was still alive and breathing. Her mind wandered to the strange new path she had chosen. She thought again of Hwita's words, that this was a deal, that he would help her and her family, but she would have to give something in return. He had not yet named his conditions, and the unknown made her nervous. Still, if she truly was special to him as Sarim believed, perhaps he would honor his promise to protect them all. When the water began to cool, Yeonwoo rose, wrapped herself in a light robe, and stepped out of the bathing chamber. A few minutes later, a familiar male voice spoke from behind her. Hwita asked whether she had finished getting ready. He smiled curiously and remarked that he had heard women often took longer to prepare than men, yet he did not mind waiting. Startled, Yeonwoo turned quickly. He had entered without warning, and the sudden closeness made heat rush to her face, half embarrassment, half anger. Hwita remained calm. He told her not to be upset and stepped closer still. His hand was open at his side, revealing the strong lines of his body. He stood so near that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Then, without hesitation, he reached out his hand. Yeonwoo sat in tense silence as Hwita leaned closer, his voice dropping to a quiet murmur. He asked whether the bold offer to become his woman had truly been her own idea, or if she had already forgotten the proposal she had made to him. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, and she held her breath, unable to look away from the playful spark in his eyes. The weight of his gaze made the air feel heavier, thicker with unspoken expectations. She gathered herself at last and met his stare directly, reminding him in a steady tone that he had once told her he would never touch a woman he did not know. Hwita smiled, acknowledging that she was right. He had come to her now, he explained, to speak plainly about their deal. He had not yet revealed his own conditions, and since he had accepted every term she offered, it was only fair that she accept his in return. Seeing the flicker of confusion cross her face, Hwita leaned in even closer, his breath warm against her skin. He wanted her to be his bride. The words struck Yeonwoo like a sudden gust of wind. She froze, surprise widening her eyes. Becoming his bride had never been part of the bargain she had imagined when she first approached him, yet refusing now felt impossible. She had made her choice. There was no turning back. He had not been rude or cruel to her. He had shown her every courtesy he could manage, and he had promised to help her escape Hyojo and protect her family. Still, his true motives remained a mystery, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. She searched his face for any hint of deception, but his expression stayed calm and unreadable. Lowering her head, Yeonwoo let out a heavy sigh as a wave of sadness washed over her. Hwita noticed the disappointment clouding her features and the way her fingers tightened nervously on the edge of the table. He asked gently whether she was saying one thing only to change her mind moments later. Her voice turned cold and sharp with hurt. "Are you enjoying playing with me this much?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He froze, startled by the raw edge in her tone. She continued quietly, pointing out how amusing it must be for him, first pretending to be polite and refusing her, then drawing her in only to speak of marriage as if it were a casual game. She had agreed to the deal without knowing his full intentions, never imagining he would demand something so intimate. Hwita listened in quiet amazement, disappointment flickering across his own face. He saw how hard she was gripping the table, how her shoulders trembled with the effort of holding herself together. Realizing how manipulative the situation must appear from her perspective, He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The light touch sent another jolt of nervousness through her. In a soft, sincere voice, he apologized. He had not explained himself well enough, and had failed to consider her feelings. If she had offered herself to a complete stranger, she must have carried a desperate reason for doing so, and the same was true for him. He had never lied to her, nor had he been joking. Yeonwoo looked up at him, astonished. For some reason she could not explain, she believed every word. When he asked her to give him a chance to explain everything properly, she breathed out in relief and nodded, ready to listen. Soon afterward, Yeonwoo stood dressed in a fresh, brightly colored hanbok. Sarim had carefully arranged her hair, and the maids had applied delicate makeup until she looked every bit the elegant lady of the court. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, poised, beautiful, and outwardly composed. Yet inside, her mind still replayed the recent conversation with Hwita. He had poured her tea with steady hands and begun telling her the full story from the beginning. As she could already sense, Janggong was no ordinary figure in this underworld realm. He was its king, the bearer of the most powerful guardian spirit known. 2 possible successors had been named to follow him, Hwita continued. The revelation stunned Yeonwoo. She had never heard of any heir besides Hyojo. Hwita went on, confirming that Hyojo was indeed Janggong's direct son and rightful heir. But there was another. He looked straight at her and stated calmly that he himself was the second heir, a distant relative of Janggong. The information left Yeonwoo reeling. She had never encountered mention of Hwita in her previous life, never suspected he held any claim to the throne. He explained that Hyojo now saw him as a threat. As long as Hwita remained in the picture, he complicated Hyojo's path to inheritance. To remove that obstacle, Hwita needed to demonstrate complete disinterest in the throne. The simplest way was to take a wife who had no ties to the power struggle. Meeting Yeonwoo at precisely the right moment had felt like fate handing him an unexpected gift. Yeonwoo absorbed the words in silence, still trying to weigh whether the danger outweighed the opportunity. Hwita asked her directly what she thought now that she knew his entire plan and her role within it. Once more he offered her the chance to become his fake bride. If she accepted, she could come to his chambers when she was ready. Later, Sarim led Yeonwoo through the corridors to Hwita's private chambers and announced her arrival. Though Yeonwoo had never heard of Janggong's distant relatives before her return, she had no other path left. She stepped inside when Hwita's calm voice invited her. He stood waiting, dressed in the same festive hanbok, a trace of pleasant surprise lighting his face when he saw her. He had doubted she would actually come. Yeonwoo walked forward with quiet determination, refusing to let fear show. Hwita studied her closely. Her courage impressed him. No matter the circumstances, she refused to break. She would use every advantage she could find to protect herself and those she loved. This time, no one would be hurt. When she reached him, he noted the resolute expression on her face and asked if she was truly certain. Yeonwoo answered firmly that the deal would proceed. Everything had to remain fair, she needed his help, and in return she would be his wife. Hwita's smile softened with satisfaction. The contract between them was now sealed. They would both keep their word. He raised his hand and gestured toward the large bed in the center of the chamber, inviting her to come with him if she agreed. Yeonwoo followed without protest. Hwita watched her every movement, reading her reactions carefully. Sensing her hesitation, he guided her gently to sit on the edge of the bed, knowing she might not have the strength to do so on her own. She stared straight ahead, silent. To keep from frightening her further, he lowered himself beside her and asked in a tender voice whether he could kiss her neck. His eyes were expectant yet gentle, waiting for her permission. She remained quiet, unsure how to respond. Her heart raced so violently she feared it might burst. Hwita noticed the long earrings she wore, and mentioned lightly that he had warned Sarim not to include them. His fingers brushed her skin with surprising tenderness as he removed them. Then he slipped an arm around her shoulders, drew her closer, and inhaled the soft scent of her hair. A hint of laughter colored his voice when he murmured that the maid must have forgotten his instructions. In that moment, unwanted memories crashed over Yeonwoo like a dark tide. She saw Hyojo's cruel smile, heard his arrogant voice claiming ownership over her body and soul. He had kissed her the same way, ignoring her tears and pleas, treating her as nothing more than a possession. The images blurred with the present. Hwita's gentle touch suddenly felt too familiar, too threatening. Panic surged through her chest. A raw scream tore from her throat, filled with despair and pain. She shoved her hands against him, begging him to stay away, to let her go. Tears streamed down her face as she spiraled into hysteria, no longer able to separate memory from reality. Hwita's eyes widened in alarm. He had no idea what had triggered her terror or what he had done wrong. He tried to calm her, holding her hands and repeating her name softly, but her body could no longer bear the overwhelming stress. Still crying, Yeonwoo began to lose consciousness. Hwita caught her before she could fall, cradling her carefully so she would not hurt herself. He kept calling her name, worry etched deep into his features, but her mind had already slipped away. He held her close, bewildered and deeply concerned, wondering what hidden wound from her past could have made even the gentlest kiss send her into such frantic fear. Yeonwoo's tears still slipped silently from the corners of her closed eyes, even as unconsciousness held her. Hwita cradled her against his chest, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He studied her pale face, desperate to understand what hidden terror had shattered her so completely at his gentle touch. The room felt heavier now, the earlier warmth of the evening replaced by a quiet tension that pressed against his ribs. From the corridor beyond the closed door, Sareem had heard the raw scream echo through the chambers. Alarm flashed across her face. She hurried forward, the other maids trailing behind her in worried clusters, their voices low and urgent as they whispered among themselves. Was that truly a cry for help coming from Lord Hwita's private rooms? What could he possibly be doing to the poor girl? Sareem pressed her ear against the wooden door, straining to catch any sound that might reveal the situation inside. The other maids tugged at her sleeve, warning her that eavesdropping, even for someone as close as Sareem, was dangerous. The Lord would not tolerate it. Sareem brushed their concerns aside, insisting she only wanted to make sure they were not needed on such a delicate night. She leaned harder, lost her balance, and the door swung open with a soft creak. Hwita's gaze snapped toward the intrusion. He crossed his arms over his chest, his expression darkening with clear displeasure. The maids froze in fright, words dying on their lips. In a low, commanding voice, Hwita ordered all but Saram to leave at once. He had no wish for unnecessary ears to linger. Once the others had retreated, he turned his stern gaze on the maid and reminded her that he had told her to wait outside, not to press her ear to his door like a spy. Sareem bowed her head, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She admitted she had acted out of genuine worry, fearing they might need something on what she had assumed would be an important night. Hwita exhaled slowly, his irritation softening just enough to acknowledge her presence. He told her there was no grand night unfolding as she imagined, then gestured for her to come closer and see for herself. Sareem stepped inside and found Yeonwoo lying on the bed. At first glance, the girl appeared to be sleeping peacefully, yet fresh tears continued to trace glistening paths down her cheeks while her body trembled with faint, lingering shudders. Sareem leaned over her with gentle concern, relieved to confirm that Yeonwoo had simply fainted. Still, she could not fathom what had driven the young woman into such a state. Hwita shrugged helplessly and suggested that a full night's rest would likely restore her. Sareem carefully brushed a tear from Yeonwoo's cheek and asked why the girl had cried so bitterly if nothing had happened. Hwita raised his hands in a gesture of innocence, insisting he had done nothing to harm her. Sareem's eyes narrowed with protective anger, though she knew in her heart he would never intentionally hurt someone under his care. She reminded him how kind he had always been to others, and questioned why Yeonwoo had been treated differently. Hwita replied evenly that his interactions with others were merely roles played for mutual benefit, nothing more. Sareem sighed in quiet despair, murmuring that perhaps only he saw it that way. She noticed the distant look in his eyes and asked if he was truly listening. Hwita's thoughts drifted back to the way Yeonwoo had recoiled from him, staring through him as though seeing someone else entirely. He wondered aloud who could have instilled such bone-deep fear in her. Sareem urged him to treat the lady with care. She was important to him now, even if it complicated matters. Hwita nodded, admitting that much remained unclear but that he intended to uncover the truth as soon as possible. He then asked whether Sareem had noticed any mark on Yeonwoo's shoulder. The maid replied that she had glimpsed a faint trace but could not be certain without closer inspection. She added that confirming it would have been simpler had the night gone as planned, yet the incident had changed everything. With a respectful bow, Sareem withdrew and closed the door softly behind her. Hwita returned to Yeonwoo's side. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead and touched her still wet eyelashes with surprising tenderness. Though she could not hear him, he whispered that she was proving far more troublesome than he had anticipated. He lingered there for several long minutes, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing until he was convinced she slept deeply. Only then did he allow himself a quiet resolve. The moment she woke, he would ask her directly what secret she carried. When Yeonwoo finally stirred, it was from the grip of another nightmare. Hyojo's face haunted her once again, both in waking memory and in dreams. Fear coiled through her body like ice water, even though she knew it had only been a dream. She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms tightly around herself in an attempt to steady the trembling that refused to leave. The name of her ex-husband echoed relentlessly in her mind, refusing to fade. A calm voice broke the silence from across the room. Hwita sat at the low table, quietly sipping tea as though he had been waiting patiently for her to wake. He asked about the nightmare that had clearly shaken her, his tone gentle and concerned. He added that she had suddenly lost consciousness the night before, and that the event had left him deeply worried. Yeonwoo's hand flew to her mouth in horror. She apologized softly, insisting she remembered nothing of what had happened and had no idea why she had reacted that way. Hwita reassured her that it was all right and suggested she eat something first, since she had been unconscious for most of the day. Later, as they sat together at the table, Yeonwoo set her chopsticks down and noticed that her hands still shook slightly. Hwita folded his arms across his chest and spoke in a serious tone. She had asked for his protection, he reminded her, and he had accepted her terms. As the one now responsible for safeguarding her, he had the right to know exactly what she feared so intensely. Yeonwoo held her breath, sensing the weight of the question. She understood she needed to tell him the truth, yet trust still felt fragile. Hyojo's image flashed before her eyes again, sharp and painful. Gathering her courage, she crossed her fingers beneath the table and began to speak, choosing her words carefully so he might understand without pressing for more than she was ready to give. She told him she had once had a husband. Her voice grew quieter as memories surfaced of the first time she met Hyojo, when they had begun dating and genuine love had bloomed between them. Whenever she saw him, her heart would race with pure happiness. She recalled rushing into his arms at the sound of his voice, nearly knocking him over in her excitement. He had steadied her with gentle hands, smiling at how sweet and direct she was, and had asked what she would do if she ever ran and fell like that. She had answered that he would always catch her. Looking up at him with shining eyes full of love, she had felt cherished in those early days. Yeonwoo paused, realizing that perhaps in the very beginning they truly had loved each other. He had been gentle then, caring, and protective. That same man had later become her worst nightmare. She decided it would be best to speak of her ex-husband first before moving on to her family. She described a household that appeared perfect from the outside. A strict mother, a seemingly loving father, herself as the eldest daughter, and a younger sister everyone adored. To outsiders it looked like a harmonious family, yet she had always carried the quiet ache of feeling superfluous. One day her teacher had announced an upcoming parent visitation at school and reminded the children to deliver the invitation cards. As the eldest, Yeonwoo had been left in charge of the house and her little sister while their parents worked. That evening she had tried to scold her sister for leaving the home in disarray, warning that their parents would return soon and expect order. When her sister ignored her, frustration built inside Yeonwoo because she knew the blame would fall on her. Just as their parents walked through the door, she stood frozen, uncertain what to say. Her mother's eyes swept the messy room, and her expression shifted from a brief smile to sharp displeasure. The woman had demanded to know why the house was in such a state. Yeonwoo attempted to explain that her younger sister had caused the mess, but her mother refused to listen. She accused her eldest daughter of shifting blame instead of taking responsibility as the older sibling. When Yeonwoo tried to defend herself, her mother's voice rose in anger. Overwhelmed and afraid, Yeonwoo had lowered her head and promised to do better, to set a proper example. Her mother then ordered her to clean the room immediately while she washed her hands, an order, not a request. Feeling small, unwanted, and utterly defenseless, Yeonwoo had begun cleaning in silence, wondering why her mother's love always seemed out of reach and why every mistake landed on her shoulders. She had decided not to mention the school visitation invitation, not wanting to burden her already irritated mother. The next morning, as Yeonwoo prepared to leave for school without a word, her mother suddenly appeared and asked if she was ready. The girl had answered with quiet excitement, and her mother had inquired whether she had anything. Yeonwoo continued her quiet recounting, her voice steady but distant as the memories unfolded before her like shadows on water. She told Hwita how her mother had suddenly asked whether she had anything else to say before leaving for school that morning. The girl had replied carefully that she did not think she had forgotten anything important, yet worry tightened in her chest at the unexpected question. Her mother then revealed that she had been informed about the open lesson scheduled for today, and gently pressed her daughter on why she had not mentioned it. Yeonwoo had answered with embarrassment, explaining that she had not done so on purpose. Her mother was usually so busy, and she had not wanted to add to the burden. She had clenched her eyes shut, bracing for the familiar sting of punishment, but instead her mother's tone softened with unexpected affection. The woman told her not to be so indecisive and asked why she feared calling her for such things. She urged Yeonwoo to look her in the eyes and answer honestly. Did she want her mother to attend the open class today or not? Surprise flickered across Yeonwoo's face. She could not understand why her mother was suddenly being so kind. Deep down she longed for it more than anything, yet fear held her tongue. After a long, trembling silence, she finally gathered the courage to admit the truth. Yes, she wanted her mother to come. A satisfied smile touched her mother's lips. If it mattered that much for her daughter's lesson, then she would be there. She turned away lightly and said they would meet at school. Even as she walked to class, Yeonwoo could hardly believe what had happened. A fragile warmth bloomed inside her chest. She felt truly happy for the first time in what seemed like forever, convinced that her mother still loved her after all. Throughout the entire lesson, she kept stealing glances toward the back of the room where her mother sat watching. She poured every ounce of effort into her performance, determined to shine, to earn praise, to make her mother proud. In her heart, she promised herself that she would be the best in the class so her mother would want to return for the next event. She wanted so badly to believe she could be loved even more deeply. Later, when they left the school grounds together, the warmth shattered. Her mother stopped and told her she was very disappointed. Yeonwoo's heart lurched painfully. She had tried so hard, how could this be? The woman went on to say she had expected her daughter to be the smartest and best in the entire class, yet she had felt ashamed in front of the other parents. If Yeonwoo continued performing like this, she would never attend such events again. She fixed her daughter with a cold stare to make sure the warning sank in, then asked whether she understood how important this was. A familiar chill settled over Yeonwoo. The dreams of being loved more crumbled into dust. Disappointment and self-blame flooded her, yet beneath it all she still yearned for her mother to simply be with her and offer the affection she had always craved. Her mother noticed the upset look on her daughter's face, but showed no softening of her own expression. She told Yeonwoo to forgive her harsh words. She had simply been very upset. She explained that she had wanted to boast to the other mothers about how smart and beautiful her daughter was, but she could not. If Yeonwoo promised to do better next time, then of course her mother would come again. She stroked her daughter's cheek and asked if she could now understand what her beloved mother was feeling. Yeonwoo nodded silently, swallowing the hurt. Moments later, her mother's phone rang. She stepped aside to take the call, instructing the girls to wait right there and watch over each other. Yeonwoo's younger sister grew impatient and asked how much longer they would have to stand there. The older girl replied that the conversation seemed to be taking time, so they must wait a little more. When her sister suggested they simply go to their mother, Yeonwoo reminded her that they had been told to stay put. She would finish talking soon. Suddenly their mother glanced in their direction while still on the phone and waved with a bright smile. The younger sister could not contain herself. She broke into a run across the road toward her. Yeonwoo shouted after her to wait, but the little girl did not listen. Panic surged through Yeonwoo as she chased after her sister, calling her name desperately. They were halfway across the pedestrian crossing when the blaring horn of a speeding lorry cut through the air. By the time Yeonwoo registered the danger, it was already too late. She looked on in pure horror as the vehicle hurtled straight toward them. The next moment blurred into chaos. A crowd gathered quickly, voices shouting in panic. Someone cried out that 2 children had been hit by a car. Others screamed for an ambulance. Yeonwoo could barely process any of it through the shock. All she felt was an overwhelming, unbearable pain that swallowed her entire body. She could not move, could not speak, could not call for help. Through the haze she saw her mother running toward the scene. Hope flickered. She wanted her mother beside her more than anything, needed to hear her voice. But her mother knelt not beside her, but somewhere nearby, closer to the younger sister. In the silence of her mind, Yeonwoo begged her to come to her too, to take care of her as well. Why had she run to her sister first? She only wanted her mother there, right now. The nightmare repeated itself endlessly in Yeonwoo's sleep after that day, the car striking them at full speed, blinding headlights, the sickening impact. It always ended the same. She jolted upright on the bed with a gasp, heart pounding wildly, drenched in cold sweat. Reality crashed back over her as she looked around the quiet room. She remembered everything, her sister's terrible condition, the pain, the despair. Gratitude washed through her that her sister was still alive, yet guilt clawed at her chest. As the older sister, she should have protected her, but she had failed. The accident was her fault. She was the reason her sister lay suffering. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered silent apologies into the empty air. From beyond the closed door, she heard her parents' voices. Her mother was crying bitterly while her father tried to soothe her. The woman kept repeating through sobs that the accident would leave them buried in debt from hospital bills. Her father assured her he would find a way to manage everything, but her mother could not calm herself. She covered her eyes and said that if they did not resolve the situation quickly, they might end up on the street. She refused to live like that. Once again, she turned her blame fully onto Yeonwoo, insisting that none of this would have happened if the girl had only behaved properly and looked after her younger sister. Yeonwoo shrank deeper into her guilt. She convinced herself that if she had never invited her mother to the open lesson, if she had not been so selfish, the accident would never have occurred. Her little sister would not be in pain, and her mother would not be drowning in trouble. Everything was her fault again. She cried alone in the dark, certain she was to blame for it all. Eventually, both girls were discharged from the hospital, but the cost of their rehabilitation proved far too high. The family could not afford the bills for both daughters, so they were forced to sell their house and move into a much older, smaller one. Yeonwoo felt the weight of guilt grow heavier. She tried to comfort her mother and make things easier, yet the woman remained cold and distant. Though Yeonwoo was relieved beyond words that her sister recovered and could enjoy life again, she herself lost something permanent that day. She no longer trusted the warmth she once sought. Every glance from her mother now carried silent reproach. The scar on her sister's body remained visible whenever the wind lifted her clothes, a constant reminder of the accident and of Yeonwoo's failure. The girl felt those accusing eyes on her alone wherever she went, until meeting their gazes became almost unbearable. Time passed and they grew older. Yeonwoo became an adult, and despite the lingering stiffness in her left little finger from the accident, she rose to fame as a composer. When one of her songs first climbed the charts and reached #1, she hurried to share the joyful news with her mother. She told her that this was the first time any of her work had achieved such success. Her mother responded that she was very proud of her daughter. The praise filled Yeonwoo with happiness for a brief, shining moment, until her mother immediately asked when she could send this month's living expenses. The warmth vanished. It was clear her mother was interested only in the money. Yeonwoo replied that she expected payment within the week and would send it as soon as it arrived. Her mother said she was glad everything had worked out, and added that it had been an especially difficult month. She was only surviving because of her eldest daughter. Yeonwoo assured her that all the money she earned was meant for the family, though in her heart she wondered if it would ever be enough to make amends. Her mother pulled her into a hug and told her she was the only one she had. Surprised by the confession, Yeonwoo decided she must keep working harder for them. The more she gave, the happier her family would become, or so she told herself. One day the entire family was traveling together by car when the weather turned violent. Heavy rain lashed the windows and fierce winds howled around them. They were on their way to handle some family business, never imagining that danger lay ahead. But fate refused to spare them. Their father lost control as the car skidded violently on the slick road. He shouted that the steering wheel had stopped responding. Panic filled the vehicle. He could do nothing to correct their path. He yelled for everyone to hold on tight and tried desperately to guide the car to safety, but it was useless. The vehicle left the road entirely and flew off the bridge. Everyone inside was screaming. Yeonwoo's voice grew quieter still, each word carrying the heavy weight of memory as she continued speaking to Hwita across the low table. She described how, even in the midst of their terror, the family inside the skidding car had clung desperately to the hope that everything would somehow turn out all right. Had soared off the bridge and struck the ground below with a violent jolt, yet by some impossible miracle none of them had been seriously injured, only shaken to the core, hearts pounding wildly, minds struggling to grasp what had just occurred. In the disoriented silence that followed, a rider on horseback approached Yeonwoo. The stranger asked calmly whether they were all right and whether they needed any help. That single encounter marked the first time her family had ever set foot in the underworld. It was on that very day that she met the man who would later become her husband, Hyojo. He had looked at the disheveled group and recognized them immediately as people from the Earth realm, showing no surprise at all. From that moment onward, a new chapter of her life unfolded, one entirely different from anything she had known before. Life in the underworld felt strange and vivid at once. Hyojo welcomed her entire family with lavish hospitality, granting them comfortable quarters within his grand palace. Every time he saw her, he would draw close and whisper tender words of love, his voice soft and sincere. He was endlessly kind and patient, always shielding her from harm and offering quiet assistance in even the smallest matters. For the first time in her life, Yeonwoo understood what it truly meant to be loved. She fell deeply in love with him and held him in the highest respect. No one had ever looked at her with such warmth and devotion. Her once frozen heart began to thaw, as though spring had finally arrived after a long, bitter winter. He helped her set aside the constant guilt she had carried for others. In his presence, she shone with genuine happiness, feeling safe and at peace for the very first time. Whenever they could steal moments together, joy filled her completely. She had discovered love in this strange new world, something she had never experienced throughout her entire previous life. Yet time passed, and something inside Hyojo began to shift. One day, while walking through the palace corridors, Yeonwoo heard wild screams and tearful pleas echoing from a distant courtyard. Alarmed, she hurried outside to see what was happening. The man she found there was no longer the gentle Hyojo she had come to cherish. He stood surrounded by battered servants, his expression twisted into something cold and cruel. His gaze fixed on her with a terrifying obsession, not the loving look of a partner, but the possessive stare of someone who viewed her as a prize caught in his grasp. He told her she had finally come, his voice laced with ice. Fear crept through every part of her body. She tried desperately to reach the kind and gentle man she had fallen in love with, speaking softly in the hope of calming him, but he seemed not to hear her at all. When she asked what he was doing, he lifted a man off the ground by the throat with one hand as though the act required no effort. She pressed him again, unable to comprehend the violence before her. He replied that he had heard rumors. One of these people had dared to touch her. His eyes burned with jealous rage and a thirst for revenge. He was consumed by it, unwilling to let any of them go. He demanded to know which man had helped her when she had nearly fallen, insisting he would prove beyond doubt that she belonged to him and him alone. When she remained silent, horror rooting her in place, he laughed wildly and declared that he would simply punish them all. He had even dragged in a few innocent bystanders for no reason at all. Once more he asked her to point out the one who had touched her. Yeonwoo stared at the gruesome scene unfolding around her, blood turning to ice in her veins. The man standing before her was no longer the person she had loved. He was a complete madman, a sadist reveling in the suffering he caused. His pupils narrowed as he looked straight through her, drunk on the power of the moment. The strain became too much. Yeonwoo's legs gave way, and she fell to her knees, a loud scream tearing from her throat in a frantic attempt to drown out the chaos inside her own mind. She stared at the floor with wide, unseeing eyes, her breathing ragged and shallow as a full panic attack gripped her. Hyojo knelt down in front of her, addressing her by name with the same sweet tone he had always used in gentler days. He took her hand in his blood-stained palm and told her everything would be all right, that she had nothing to worry about. He would handle it all himself. For one fleeting second she wondered if the entire nightmare had been only a dream. There he was, the Hyojo she remembered, gently kissing the back of her hand. Yet the fresh drops of blood on his face and fingers proved the horror was real. His gaze softened further, and he told her affectionately that he loved her very much. Yeonwoo said nothing. She simply stared into the empty space beyond him, feeling an aching void open wide inside her chest, rapidly filling with pure, suffocating terror.